Hello everyone, Hitesh Sir here. Imagine a busy school with no main gate or security guard. Students, random strangers, and stray dogs could simply wander in and out of the classrooms whenever they wanted. It would be total chaos. Inside your body, your cells face this exact same problem. They live in a crowded environment, and they need a way to keep harmful things out while holding the good things, like nutrients and water, inside. This is the job of the cell membrane, also known as the plasma membrane. You can think of it as the cell's intelligent security guard. Without this boundary to decide exactly what stays and what goes, a cell would dissolve into its surroundings. It is the only thing keeping the cell's internal world separate from the outside environment. For a long time, scientists knew this boundary existed, but they couldn't see how it worked. Standard microscopes just didn't have the power to show something that thin. That changed in the 1950s with the electron microscope. Instead of light, it used electron beams to reveal details thousands of times smaller than before. To understand the membrane structure, researchers studied human red blood cells. By analyzing these, they finally determined exactly what the membrane is made of. They found that the membrane is built mostly from two ingredients: lipids, which are fat molecules, and proteins. In 1972, scientists proposed the fluid mosaic model. It describes the membrane as an ever-shifting, oil-like ocean of lipids, with larger protein structures floating and drifting through it like boats. This discovery showed that the membrane isn't a stiff, dry wall. It is a flexible, moving layer of oil and protein. So how do things get through this oily layer? Let's look at our school again. When the bell rings, students naturally rush from a crowded classroom into an empty hallway. They are moving from a high concentration to a low one. In biology, we call this passive transport. Because these molecules are just following the natural flow from a crowded area to an open one, the cell doesn't have to spend any energy to move them. When small, neutral molecules drift across the oily layer like this, the process is called simple diffusion. When water specifically moves from a high concentration to a lower one across the membrane, we call it osmosis. Passive transport is the cell's way of getting what it needs for free. It keeps the cell hydrated and supplied with basic materials without costing any effort. But there is a catch. Some molecules, called polar molecules, have an electrical charge that makes it impossible for them to slide through the oily lipid layer on their own. These molecules need a helper. This is where those floating proteins come in. They act as carrier proteins, opening up a specific path to let these molecules pass through the barrier safely. Even with a protein helper, this is still passive transport. The molecules are still following the natural flow, so the cell still spends zero energy. But what if the cell needs to move something in the opposite direction? Imagine a student trying to push their way into a classroom while a massive crowd is rushing out. Pushing against the crowd takes work. When a cell forces molecules to move from an empty area into a crowded one, it's called active transport. To do this, the cell has to pay. It uses an energy molecule called ATP. Think of ATP as the cell's currency. It is spent to power the pumps that move molecules against the natural flow. The best example is the sodium-potassium pump. It uses ATP to constantly pull potassium into the cell and push sodium out, even though both sides are already crowded. Through active transport, the cell acts as a strict manager, spending its energy to make sure it has exactly the right balance of chemicals inside. Let's zoom out and look at the cell as a whole. We know the membrane is like a shifting liquid rather than a solid shell, but why does that texture matter? Because the liquid-like membrane is so flexible, the cell can grow. It simply stretches and ripples to cover the new space without tearing. This flexibility also allows the cell to reproduce. The membrane pinches inward at the center until it separates, creating two brand new, perfectly sealed cells. Without this moving, oil-like architecture, basic functions like growing, healing, and dividing into new cells would be physically impossible. The cell membrane is more than just a container. It is a living, responsive system that manages the very survival of the cell every second. Once you understand how this boundary works, you can start to see how every other part of biology fits together. I'm Hitesh Sir, and I'll see you in the next lesson.